It is Spooktober, or so I have been told, which this year is just for all of the people for whom 2020 isn't spooky enough. Nevertheless, while scripting my video for Numenera on Friday, I sort of went off on a tangent and decided to package that in a separate little video that I think you're gonna find very useful if you want to be creating scary or just memorable monsters and creatures. And really, the principle of this can be applied to pretty much anything in your games, or just any world-building project or creative project where you might need such a thing. Sometimes I get the impression that there is this culture in RPGs that there is an expectation from the players that if they just roll knowledge about something that they encounter, usually a creature, and they roll well, the GM basically has to tell them everything about it. Like exact details that are just one step removed from just straight up sending you the stat block and the lore page from the monster manual. And especially when it comes to D&D, a lot of players will have read the monster manual and have encountered many of the monsters therein in other adventures. So even if their characters don't know what's happening, they as players, as the monster is described, know, this is a that and that. They probably won't metagame this because, again, their character doesn't know, but the fear that they as players experience is abstracted to a greater degree, where it's more like the numbers that are associated with the thing. If you've analyzed a lot of horror fiction, you know that many monsters work because the audience doesn't really know what to expect next. It plays with the inherent fear that humanity has of the unknown. There's a reason why good horror films don't just show the monster right away. They sort of maybe will show traces of it, or things that it leaves in its wake to build the tension and let the audience fill in the blanks with their own horrific imaginations. And when they finally do reveal the monster, there is usually some kind of surprise attached to it that immediately just raises the stakes to a whole nother level and just straight up drives the suspension into 3 gears higher in this moment of panic. So I'm gonna tell you a story, and yes, you are in for a whole couple minutes worth of just self-congratulatory autofellatio, because this is one of the most memorable and cool things that I have created in the role-playing sphere, and of course you are allowed to steal it. So I'm going to give you an example of how such a story might unfold, and then I will, tell you what the individual steps are to make this happen. Content warning! This story includes spiders, like a lot of them. So I'm gonna put just a number on the screen, which is when the story is done, and we just get into the analysis of what happened. Okay, so we're in a medieval fantasy setting, a small city. Think, if you've played The Witcher, Oxenfurt. The city is beset with an obvious infestation. Many people have disappeared, and there are signs of the presence of dangerous creatures everywhere. Spiders crawl around town, seemingly more interested in scouting and gathering information than they are in doing whatever is spiders do all day. Even the most well-maintained streets are lined with cobwebs. Sometimes at night, most often near the sewers, the beast will strike and drag someone, some unlucky individual who just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, down into where probably its lair is, which is the sewers. Maybe when the heroes are already in town, the next disappearance that happens is someone particularly big and burly that caught their attention earlier because he seems so strong to show how badass this monster is. Some of the townsfolk have seen the creature but seem quite traumatized by it, giving accounts of not really having been able to get a proper look in the twilight. The sewers themselves are too stuffed with cobwebs to work properly anymore. The laborers who usually go down there for maintenance refuse to do their jobs because none of them come back, and even the City Watch sent an expedition to see what is going on, and they didn't return either. Someone in the party who's knowledgeable about animals runs into a tiny little spider with red mandibles, the kind of which they have never seen before or even heard of before. So far, what's happening to any experienced adventuring party seems quite obvious. There's a giant spider, or maybe several giant spiders, with some ability to exert influence over smaller spiders in the sewers. There's something odd going on, but it's spiders. At this point, nobody's actually seen the monster, but it's a very reasonable guess. As the party descends into the sewers fairly early on, already they find a single human corpse wrapped obviously in spider webbing, as their victims tend to be, and blood is crusted in between the sticky web, and if they cut it open, they will find that the corpse is entirely desiccated, mummified even, completely drained of all vital fluids. As the party descends deeper and deeper, they encounter more and more of the corpses, and eventually they realize that some of them seem to be arranged in almost orderly fashion as they are stuck to the patches of webbing on the walls. So far in terms of creatures, only small spiders have been seemingly scouting the area or ignoring the party altogether. They feel watched. They know that whatever lives down here knows that they are here, and it hasn't decided to show itself yet. Eventually, they enter a cavern so large that not even their torchlight can fully illuminate it, and the walls are lined with corpses. Depending on the size of the city, it could be well over 24 of them, mummified in their cocoons, completely motionless. Every footstep makes that wet, fleshy sound of stepping on massive amounts of spiderwebs. It is in fact so sticky that moving properly is difficult. In the middle of the cave, one of the characters detects a smidge of movement from the ceiling above. Dangling above them, hanging from a thread, is not exactly a spider, but a man. His skin is pallid, and though his innermost pair of eyes, though red, looks human, the farther out it goes, the more his eyes look like those of a spider. His devilish grin reveals a set of sharp fangs. It seems focused right on your neck, where your blood pulses. And as you try to make sense of what you are seeing, he bursts into a cloud of tiny spiders and falls onto you. All around the room, the cocoons begin to stir, and you know that you are surrounded. You walk down here, knowing full well that it was going to be an ambush, and you got exactly what you expected. This, of course, is a spider vampire, and the players don't really need a lot of explanation in order to make sense of it, because their preconceived notions about vampires fall into place at this point, and I, of course, did properly foreshadow that there was also a vampire involved, even if I covered it in a thick layer of spiders. The attacks only happening at night, classic monster behavior, even more classic vampire behavior. Witnesses having had their memories manipulated, also a classic vampire trope. Even the vampire bursting into a cloud of tiny spiders, that is just a vampire bursting into a cloud of bats or mist. And the main thing that I did here is I took two things that were scary and put them together. It's really that simple. That is the core of the technique. You take two things, put them together, make a new thing out of it. You can also do three things, maybe four things. Make sure that it still works thematically. Of course, that's not the whole story. You also need to set up the adventure in a way that is conducive to horror, and for that you will need a lot of smoke and mirrors. You'll have to employ a lot of subterfuge with your players in order to be able to send them down the not quite wrong trail. It was absolutely the right trail, but also at the same time foreshadow the kind of twist that will happen. Which, once you try and do it, you will find is really not as difficult as I make it sound. When they encounter the actual creature, don't just go, "It's a spider vampire," even though your players might have an idea in their heads of what that combination of things might look like. Show, don't tell. Describe it the way I did. Allow the players in their moment of disgust, terror, and confusion to contextualize what they see within their own framework. They will come to that exact conclusion if you telegraph it right. That puts the fear in their own heads instead of just telling them that what they are seeing is scary. From the foreshadowing, or just luck, the players might absolutely have guessed that this isn't simply a spider, that there is also a vampire involved. But that's not really that much of a big deal, because even knowing the combination of the two, they don't really know any specifics of what that creature might do. It will just make their imagination run wild. The only way with which I could have broken that suspense is by confirming or denying that it is a spider vampire and giving any level of details on what a spider vampire is and what it might be able to do. This is why, if you're gonna use this technique, the knowledge roll is your worst enemy. Because if you have, say, a vampire hunter in the party, they see those spiders, they go, "Ah, look, this vampire spider type deal situation. Those are parts of the vampire spider and they work for him. I know this because I'm a professional vampire hunter." But would they know this, really? What if you just didn't tell them? I mean, sure, when confronted with a novel problem, an expert will have a better guess as to what it might be. But if it is truly a novel problem that not they or anyone that they have gained knowledge from has ever encountered before, they'll probably also be stumped. And given that we're working with fantasy, you can come up with all kinds of aberrations. It doesn't matter how good the roll is. Something that you cannot know is something that you cannot know. Like, it doesn't matter if you roll 200 natural 20s at this exact point in time. You couldn't know what color my underwear is. Green, by the way. It's green. And of course, then at the end of the adventure, you can repay the vampire hunter character for not having them allowed to use their expertise by making this a whole plot hook on which they are the expert, which is, how did this happen? This has never happened before, something like this. Spider vampires are a completely new thing, and I am the first member of my professional caste to work against one of them. How do they work differently from other vampires? I have to find this out now. And did they sire any childer? That would be horrific. Now, of course, we could have used this combination of spider and vampire to come up with all manner of different things. This technique is a little bit like alchemy after all. Could have just come up with like the vampire spider. That's just a kind of spider that exists and it drinks blood. It's a minor nuisance. We could have had just regular vampire who uses spiders as his animal thralls to gather information. That would also be interesting, of course, but it wouldn't yield the same kind of main star of the show, monster of the week type creature. Although, of course, depending on your campaign, I think that like a vampire spy master that uses spiders might be a very, very good like arc villain. But this sort of more feral spider vampire is something that you can build a sort of closed mystery around. You need to be aware of all of the different aspects that make up the individual objects that you are trying to combine and what makes them scary, and then recombine them in a way that you think is most scary. And by the way, this isn't just copying shit. This is how creativity has worked for thousands of years. Take two things that exist, put them together in a new and innovative way. Mind control parasites, for instance, were created by controlling the parasite, which is scary in and of itself, and then also the aspect of mind control, which is scary for whole different reasons. Put together, they have, over the years, created some of the most iconic archetypal villains. And to make it easy for you, just look up lists of common phobias on the internet, put two of them together, you have your thing. Although, and this does need to be said, be careful with scary shit. Ultimately, we all come to the game table to experience a lot of fun, so it does pay to know what your players are deeply phobic of in a way that they do not want to see it in their game. I'm a big advocate of therapeutic roleplay, which can help people conquer their inherent fears, phobias, and work through traumas. However, it is essential that you talk this through very well with the player first. Situations like this, it's very important to communicate clearly and gather affirmative consent, and then when everybody has their safe word, we can go ahead and have some fun. I know what you mean now, person who has pointed out to me that D&D sounds a lot like BDSM. So my task to you right now is take two things you find scary, combine them, put them in the comments. Let's see how we can go wild with our imaginations. Also, people will steal those ideas. I will steal those ideas if they're good. And just to mention this, of course, you don't have to put together two scary things to create something scary. You can put together any two things, like you can put together guy, goat, Now you have satyrs. They have, of course, over the millennia in which they have existed in our minds, accrued a whole load of things that are associated with them, which is how these things become their own archetypes. Or, and this is particularly mean, you can combine something inane or, nice even, with something that is very scary. Like, for instance, the friendly old lady who will, in the forest, drug you and then eat your ass. Not like just in general because it's part of your body. You know what I mean. Stop thinking that. At this point, we've combined the kindly old grandmother, which everybody loves the kindly old grandmother, with cannibalism, which, most people rather do not like. Ultimately, very simple trick. Take two classics, make them into something new. Executed properly, it works wonderfully. So go watch some horror media, try to learn what their tricks are to make stories interesting, and try to incorporate that into your game sessions. That will make you a much better GM. And after all, isn't that the only thing that all of us want in life? Even more than food and shelter. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. And in that spirit, here's a bit of trivia, right? Cannibalism and capitalism sound so much alike that with the take where I say cannibalism with the old grandma, I had to do it like 10 times, because I always ended up saying capitalism. I wonder why that is the case. And see you around, cunts.